Hello and welcome everyone to the first Nature Writing for Children webinar for 2022. My name is Shashwat DC, and on behalf of Azim Premji University, I'd like to welcome you all to this monthly webinar series, which is part of our overall Seeking Sustainability initiative. That brings to fore authors and storytellers who have ingrained nature and environment into their writings. Over the past couple of months, that we have been, very many months, in fact, we have been conducting this webinar series. There have been one important aspect that has come out. Whatever be the grander objective, the idea of ingraining nature into writing, or talking about environmental issues and taking them to a younger generation, one of the most important aspect that has come forth is the importance of storytelling. How interesting, or how how great the plot is, that is what determines whether the book gets read or doesn't read at all. I remember when I was very many years back, Uncle Pai or Anand Pai from Tinkle Comics had told me once that the best test of how good a story is to stop a kid when he's running out to play cricket and tell him a story. If the story is good enough that he stays back and listens to it, that shows that it's a great, it's a great film by itself. So that's the kind of interesting aspect of storytelling. And today we are very fortunate to have a guest with us who has been emphasizing and bringing to beauty the whole art of storytelling. He doesn't only tells interesting tales, but he has created a whole set of fictional characters who continue the tradition of storytelling in a very interesting way. He has ingrained nature, and not only nature but also adventure into his part of series. We have the Vikram-Aditya series, the set of books that is there, and they have given nature reading a very interesting paradigm. Deepak Deepak Dalal, he gave up his career in chemical engineering to write stories for children, and we are very fortunate to have him here joining us from the not so quaint city of Pune. Thank you so much, Deepak.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and hosting the talk today, we have Sravanti Uppaluri, who's a faculty at Azim Premji University. She teaches biology at the university, and she's also very much a driving force behind our recently launched online textbook, I think biology.in. And so thank you so much, Shravanti, for taking over the reins of this talk today.
Thanks, Shashwat. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm very happy to introduce Mr. Deepak Dalal to our webinar series and try to bring out some of the interesting features of his writing and why really nature writing for children, especially, is a very rich source of information for students, or sorry, for for readers and for young people. Deepak, I'm very glad, and it's an honor to be here with you. So I was wondering if I know that you have actually two sets of sort of two series that you have written. One is the Vikram-Aditya stories, based on, I think they're teenage boys, right?
That's
Teenage
correct.
boys and
Teenage
their
boys, right?
adventures. Yeah. And then there's Feather Tales, which is targeted at a
Younger
younger
kids.
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get into that, I think it might be nice for our audience members to hear a little bit about your journey and how you've come to these two series. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more. Shashwat already mentioned that you are actually a chemical engineer by training. So
Yes. Th- Thanks, Sravanti. I I would put it. I was a chemical engineer, uh, and it was one of those things that because everybody in my family was an engineer, and my cousins, my uncles, my dad, and we have an engineering business. They kind of assumed that I would go into engineering. And I did that without really thinking. And I remember when I was studying in the US, instead of referring engineering journals, I was continuously picking up wildlife journals and reading them. And it didn't strike me then. But when I returned back to India and I joined the family business, and I really started traveling, at that time, and I saw so many wonderful parts of India. I was very lucky in the sense that I trekked along the coastline. We just walked 150 kilometers along the coastline. We I once remember from a place called Lonavla, which is not far from here, all the way to Mahabaleshwar. I trekked just keeping to the Western Ghats, Asayadris. And this was, I really didn't know much about these areas, but I saw so much during those walks. Like we passed a lot of Shivaji's forts on that Western Ghat walk. Along the coastline, we saw such beautiful places. I mean, you can't imagine these kind of beaches and that kind of stuff. And this is an India which was I didn't know about, and I knew that none of my friends knew about, and and it was there, and it was just this incredible place to set stories.
Right.
It struck me, I mean, while I was walking to these places that I could do this because I love traveling, I love trekking, I love the mountains, I love the seas. India's got all that, and I love nature, and
Yeah.
there aren't too many stories which actually bring all this together, and so I thought, let me give it a shot. In fact, the first book which I wrote was set in Lakshadweep, and
Mm-hmm.
I used to do a lot of windsurfing, and I used to do it at a lake which is nearby here in Pune. But we all got bored of the lake after a couple of years of windsurfing there, and somebody said, "Let's go to Lakshadweep and surf between the islands." And I had no idea about the islands.
Right.
I didn't know there were coral atolls. I knew nothing about that. But we just packed our boards and we went there. We convinced Doordarshan to film us. In those days, Doordarshan used to come and do all these sporting events, and we had the full backup of the Lakshadweep administration, and we landed up there. And the best part during this trip was that I stayed with the locals. I stayed in their
Mm-hmm.
homes. I went fishing with them. I went scuba diving with them.
Right.
I saw the islands, and we, of course, windsurfed between the islands, which was one great adventure. But I saw so much, which was, if you just think about it in school, what do we learn about the Lakshadweep Islands? We learn that they grow coconuts out there, and their
Right.
main industry is fishing, and that's it.
Yeah.
Nothing more than that. They don't tell you about the coral reefs. They don't tell you about the atolls. They don't tell you about the lagoons. They don't tell you about the beauty of that. I mean, the transparency of the water. They don't tell you about the high seas. And
Yeah.
here I was. I
And
was
the
very
rich
lucky.
life, the rich
Yeah,
aquatic life as well, right? Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
And we discovered so much. And I had the locals with me, and I learned so much about the place. I said, heck, let me write a story about this. And that was the first book that came about.
Right.
And, from there was a lot of nature in it through coral reefs. There was a lot of adventure in it. And, it's finally at the end of the day, if you want a kid to read your book, as Shashwat was saying, you need a strong story. You need strong adventure. You need things happening.
Right.
And that really is half the work of writing a book. And the other part is researching it. And I was very lucky to research so much in this. So that's
Right.
how the first book came about. And
Mm-hmm.
after that, there have been 7 more in the series. And we were talking about the Feather Tales books.
Right.
So how did that come about? In the sense that I became a bird watcher, I think, a little later. I mean, after being 25, I think around 25 or 30 years old, I first picked up binocs and started really looking at birds. And I
Mm-hmm.
just fell in love. And, there are about 10,000 species of birds worldwide. India gets about 1,200 species. And, what do children know about
Right.
birds? They know about crows, they know about pigeons, they know about kites. These are the birds you
Yeah.
see in cities. You might know
Yeah.
about mynas, but it all ends there. And if you see a beautiful bird, they'll say, "Oh, look at that lovely bird," but they know nothing beyond that.
Right.
And, you know, India, I mean, you have cranes, you have storks, you have hornbills, you have egrets,
Yeah.
you have
Right.
woodpeckers, you have kingfishers, all this incredible array of birds,
Yeah.
and we just know these few ones which are in our cities.
And actually, there's an intrinsic value in. I think I've discovered this myself recently. Is you can spot a bird, and as you said, or you can say, "Oh, it's beautiful," but knowing a little bit about it, or even knowing
Makes
its
all the
name,
difference. Yeah.
yeah, it really changes the way that you appreciate it. And I think I didn't really realize this fact until I myself have started to look a little
And
bit
the
more
next
deeply. Yeah.
next step is to buy a pair of binocs and
Right.
look and just see the true beauty of it. And then, if you get a little
Yeah.
deeper into it, you don't even have to look. You hear the sound of the bird, you hear the call of the bird, you hear the song of the bird, and
Yeah.
you know that that's the one sitting out there.
Right.
So this idea was to connect kids with these birds and take them beyond the 4 or 5 birds they know, and to
Right.
make them understand that we have pelicans, we have
Right.
the
And
hornbills, and
these
there's
are
whole.
all again birds that you find in India.
Yes, but it's
Okay.
there's you see, it's another great thing about birds is because they migrate, all right,
Yeah.
and there as a storyteller, you have this incredible canvas that you can set your stories around every part of the world. I can set a story
Right.
in the Arctic tern when it migrates between Antarctica and the Arctic. You know,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
have birds from New Zealand, birds from Thailand, birds from any part of the Amazon, and
Right.
you can set stories.
Right.
It's a
Right.
huge
Right.
canvas. So.
All
So
this while we've been talking about how the world is has been so much more connected recently because of airplane travel, but birds
the
have been
birds have
doing
been
this
long
for
back. How
right.
true. Yeah, well
Yeah.
said. Yeah, yeah.
So I wonder, the reason I asked you about these birds, and if you had based them on birds that were found in India or migrated to or from India, was I wanted to ask you why it's important for you, or is it important for you that your stories should be based in India or in natural settings or habitats that are found in India, and was that something that was really important for you to do? Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, uh, there's so many wonderful books internationally for kids, and they're set in their part of the world. There are very few which, I mean, India's got this incredible canvas. We got the world's tallest mountains in the Himalayas, the whole chain from Kashmir to Arunachal, all right, with
Yeah.
Nepal in between, of course. But it's an incredible set of mountains. We have 8,000 kilometers of coastline. We have some of the best forests. We have tropical rainforests in the Andaman Islands. We
Yeah.
have coral reefs. We have lagoons. We have deserts, hot tropical deserts. We have cold frozen deserts in Ladakh. So, I mean, there is so much. Why would I
Yeah.
look elsewhere? And
Right.
nobody is doing this in the sense. Ruskin Bond, of course, has written books, but
Yeah.
he's in Missouri and those
Yeah.
areas. And this canvas is huge. And
Yeah.
it just was wonderful. I mean, and so I'm not going to set stories anywhere else when it comes to the Vikram-Aditya series.
Right.
But when it comes to the bird series, I mean, I would love to also write stories in other parts of the world, and yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But
So
yeah, so yeah.
do you have a favorite landscape?
Ah, for me, I'd broaden it in the sense that I loved the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
My my first love is the mountain, along with the shoreline and the
Okay.
oceans. These are
Okay.
my two favorites. And then very closely beyond that is what do you call our forests and places like that. I think it's just wherever nature is there, where you can lose
Right.
yourself in the beauty of the place, in
Right.
the in where where humans haven't changed it too much. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Whatever we've changed is ugly, but whatever God made is still very beautiful. You know.
Right.
So
And
I
which
would
of your stories is set in the Sahyadris or in the mountains?
this well I've got a
Or
book.
have you yet to write one?
No. There are two. The Ladakh adventure and the snow leopard
Mm-hmm.
adventure are both set in the Himalayas,
Okay.
and the
But you don't have one in
Sahyadris.
the Sahyadris.
Sahyadris are my backyard, my home. I mean, I just
Yeah.
drive. In fact, my farmhouse is in the Sahyadris. Uh,
Yeah.
so I have a couple of books set out there, and in fact, if you ask me, because I live out here, I was able to bring out nature and the beauty of this place better than any other books because I know this. I've traveled in this area all the time,
Right.
and
Right.
I'm trekking, I'm camping, I'm cycling, there's
Yeah.
Shivaji's forts to climb, and I'm there every other day. So I would say that these books really bring out the beauty of a place better than any of the others,
Mm-hmm.
simply because it's my home. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. So I guess a very important thread through all your books are Vikram and Aditya, your two main characters. So I was
Right.
wondering if you could tell us where these two kids came from.
Yeah. Well, Vikram is this. There are two of them, Vikram and Aditya, and Vikram is this guy who's perfectly correct, does things right, doesn't break rules, very intelligent. in difficult situations, he always thinks first and then acts and always gets it right. The kind of
Mm-hmm.
person I've always wanted to be, but I'm not, you know. and
Yeah.
and he loves wildlife and he loves traveling, and so I mean that really. And his best friend is this tall, strapping young boy who his classmate, who is the exact opposite of Vikram. The only real thing which is common between them is their love for travel and their love for wildlife and nature. But he is the guy who does things first and then thinks afterwards.
Right.
And impulsive character. Uh, so these two are the main characters. And when I first wrote my first book, there was no girl in it. That was Lakshadweep Adventure.
Mm-hmm.
That was because I wasn't sure how to handle girls. I mean, I could handle boy stories, but I
But you
wasn't
have
very
two
confident.
daughters, right? You have two
Yeah,
daughters.
I do have two daughters, and that helped a lot.
Right.
But the kind of feedback I got, that I
Uh,
had to bring in a girl, and so I've always had girls since those books. And now there's a girl who's more or less permanent in the stories, and her name is
mm-hmm.
Chitra, and
Mm-hmm.
she is quite the opposite of the girl you would actually meet. And I mean, in a sense, she loves reptiles, she
Mm-hmm.
loves finding snakes,
Mm-hmm.
and she and all the creepy crawlies, and she loves the wildlife and outdoors, and she's a strong, strapping girl who beats all the boys at swimming and various other things. So
So you're trying to
yes,
break some stereotypes. That's good.
that's right, that's right. And yeah, she's now come into my stories as along
Okay.
with the boys.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So when you're creating the characters and the stories, how does your story emerge? So I know you when we had a conversation before, you said that you do a lot of research. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about the research that you do, both in terms of the location, as well as if there's anything involved while you're, um, you know, building your character. So in both
Okay, sure,
senses.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, so I'll give you an
So,
example of my
sorry, I want to say the reason I ask this is, of course, because it's intrinsically interesting, but also because I think if there are any aspiring writers out there who are watching, I think this would be a very useful answer for them as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Sorry.
so the I think the Andaman books. I'll give a little bit of background on that. I'd never been to the Andaman Islands. I'd always read about them. I always wanted to go there. And I remember when I was a kid, I used to read about these people, the locals out there, the natives, the Jarawa, the
Mm-hmm.
tribals, who, when the Indian government tried to put a road through their forest, how they reacted in such a way that they would sabotage, they would kill, they refused to let them build the road, and you know they were they were actually people who lived hunter-gatherer lives. They haven't changed their lifestyle since the last 50,000 years, and they intrigued me. They wear no clothes, they hunt with bows and arrows, and I said, heck, I really want to meet those. I want to know more about them, just out of natural curiosity, and that was always there in my head throughout. And
Mm-hmm.
then I remember later on, I have a lot of friends who are into wildlife,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them, his name is Dr. Ravi Shankar, and he's from Valley School. Actually, we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
Valley School earlier, and he he moved to the Andaman Islands to basically study this bird, which is called the edible nest swiftlet. And when he went
Okay.
there, he kind of said, Deepak, if you want to write a book, you're most welcome to come. And he kind of opened the doors for me. So I landed up in the
Right.
Andaman Islands without any idea what the story I was going to write about.
Uh-huh.
And he was introduced me to his other friends who are ecologists too. Somebody who was studying crocodiles, because they're the largest crocodiles in the world, the salties, live in the creeks of the Andaman Islands. Somebody who
I
was
see.
studying snakes, somebody who was studying birds. So I got this incredible input of wildlife through these people. And Ravi, I remember, this edible nest swiftlet, quickly I'll just tell you, is essentially a bird. It's a swiftlet that flies very smart, very fast. It's a very small bird, nondescript. But what it does, it builds nests in caves. And all birds for nests, they collect twigs, they collect various things, and they build their nests. This bird has got extraordinary salivary glands, and it actually secretes the entire nest. And so this is an edible nest. And anything being edible, you know what humans are. They break them and they take them away. and they eat
Right.
them. And across Southeast Asia, these birds are there. And there is this great thing about bird nest soup, and it's supposed to increase your virility and do all kinds of stuff. And so these nests are broken even before the birds hatch, and the hatchlings come down, and you know, it's very sad, but the numbers plummeted. And so this my friend Ravi had taken ownership of about 3 caves on an island, a very remote island called Interview Island, and he was going to guard those caves. And
I
so he
see.
said, he said, Deepak, come down. And so we went, and I stayed out there. And I remember we had this entire island to ourselves, and there was just nobody out there except 50 odd elephants, which we had to be worried about, because there was only one pond where you could have a bath, and they would all come
Right.
there and we'd also go there. But anyway, besides that, it was just an incredible introduction to the islands, and just seeing great stuff, looking after those birds. I mean, going through all that, and then the
And
underwater.
also being, also just being completely alone, right? It's just the two of you and no
Yes,
other human being in
his
sight.
wife
Yeah.
was there, and we had a
Yeah.
few Karen, the local Karen Burmese who were helping out. I mean, so there was a group of us, but there was just us and nobody else.
Yeah.
And then later on, he organized for me to take a boat. I mean, but there's a lot of these Karen boatmen out there, fishermen, and they are very good with their boats, and they have these dungis, which are actually dugouts. And I hired one person, and we went from island to island to island. We carried all our food, and we used to live on different islands. I got all my
Wow.
permissions, and we went to these islands, and we used to scuba dive, and it was an incredible experience. And this gave me a huge background for my stories. And
Right.
also studying crocodiles. I went with people up the creeks, those who were studying crocodiles. We used to go up at night. It was one heck of an adventure. I won't go into the details of it, but
Yeah.
but there were two things I didn't get. One was I never got to meet the Jaguar. That forest is completely blocked out to outsiders, and there's a reason for it. No, it's not meant for tourists to go there, and they're dangerous. I mean, they don't
Right.
like you, they kill you.
Yeah.
I'd say, but I wanted to get in there because I wanted to write a story mainly on them.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen. I went back home. I started
But I
writing a
think
book.
there are very few documented cases of people visiting and coming back, right?
So
This is,
the way it worked out was that
yeah.
about a year later, because I live in Pune, I live very close to the National Defense Academy, and I happened to know the commandant pretty well. And his next posting was at the Andaman Islands, and he was in charge of the tri-service out there. And so I wrote to him, sir, I want to write a book, and I've been there, and I had some trouble. So he said, what do you need me to do? I mean, what kind of help do you want? So I listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Top of the thing is to meet the Jarawa. And the second one is to travel to Barren Island. And I wanted to set a story there. And he said, come. And I went. And all the same people whom I had met and who had barred my way this time gave me a salute and said, you can go through.
Yeah.
And I had this most incredible experience living with them, spending a few days with them, going back in time. It was just, they live exactly the life of hunter gatherers, which their foster fathers and their ancestors, talking about 50,000 years back. Nothing has changed. And I was very lucky to spend time with them. And that's the kind of research that goes into a book. It's
Yeah.
not like it takes months of research. It takes more than a year to write these kind of books because there's so
Right.
much you have to bring in. You got to weave in the adventure. You come back again, and so that's the kind of little background on how the
That's
research is
fascinating.
done. Yeah, for these stories.
That's,
And,
so, speaking about this, I wanted to ask you actually, this we didn't discuss earlier, but one of the things, aspects of setting your stories in these incredible landscapes, right, is also that, one of the hopes, I suppose, is also that you get your readers to be interested in wildlife, to be interested in the landscapes, to start to see the value in wildlife, right? Which I think especially people in the cities don't really
no, they don't.
appreciate at all. But then there's this contradictory viewpoint that often people bring up, that hey, once you start doing this, people start looking at it as a kind of tourist attraction, right? And you have more and more tourists going to this place. I've heard this about the lakes in Ladakh a lot because they appear in all kinds of movies. And so then how do you balance that? And have you thought about that when you write about it in your books, right? So it shouldn't just be a tourist attraction, but rather something that people start to value and see their, intrinsic value. And so how do you balance that when you're writing about it? I
Well,
think I
this
see
is
it coming through in your writing, but I'd like to hear it from you. Yeah.
this is an unfortunate aspect of tourism, mass tourism that we have in India. What can you do about it? Ladakh was discovered after that movie was made out there, Three Idiots. And the moment they discovered the beauty out there, and then, of course, the tour operators, and it just became the thing to take them to these lakes. But there's more to Ladakh than that, in the
Yeah.
sense that the area where I set my stories was deep in the hills. I mean, we went right up to the to the glaciers, to the source of various rivers, searching for snow leopards. And so this aspect is there. People do go for these kind of things. It's the same. It will be the same thing for uh, if you go to the beaches, etc. Uh, it's crowded with people, but there are so many other places which, far
Yeah.
away, more difficult to get to, and very, very few people go there. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there is this unfortunate aspect, but the idea finally is that children live in cities, and when they travel to other cities, and
Yes.
they don't get exposed to nature. They have no
Yeah.
clue. And the thing is, if you want to save something, you got to love it. It's not something.
Yeah.
It's something which you need a reason to save it. Now, if
Yeah.
you've never been there, you don't know anything about it. It's not. It's just you're never going to see any reason to preserve it.
Yeah.
So these books, what they try and do is to bring a connection between kids and wildlife and wilderness areas.
Yeah.
Uh, that's by setting it in these areas, and hopefully, through a story. I mean, when you read it through a story, it's very different. So it's not like a lecture, or it's not like it
Right.
comes out. The nature comes out through a story, and hopefully that when they get older, when they actually are the forest ministers or the environmental ministers, that if you've imbued some kind of love in them at a younger stage, that they'll hopefully take the right decisions later on. I mean, the idea is to make them love these areas and see
Yeah.
a reason to preserve them.
So one of the things that I found when I was reading your book, Ranthambore, is the idea that what you brought out was that each animal, each tiger in particular in that story was they all have their own personalities, right?
Yeah,
Um, and but it was not the kind of thing where say Vikram and Aditya said, okay, now I know this animal and we are going to be friends. So there's still
no, no,
always
no,
this kind of distance, right? Which I think
absolutely.
is actually really nice to preserve because, often kids who read this, they kind of fantasize that here now I'm going to,
No, no,
uh,
no. Yeah,
they're bringing brought into my life, but that's not the idea at all, right? That you
not
have
at
to,
all, not
yeah,
at all. The
yeah. And
idea
I
is
think that's
to,
really important. And I see
yeah,
that you brought that out actually in the story. So that was nice.
no, in the sense the tiger is not something you can cuddle up to. Wildlife is
Yeah.
wildlife. Leave wildlife the way it is.
Yeah, that's the
Respect it.
point. Yeah, yeah,
Respect it. Enjoy from a jeep.
yeah,
Watch through your binoculars, but don't cross any boundaries.
yeah,
You just
yeah.
cannot. Whether it's tigers, whether it's deer, whether it's elephants, whether it's mongooses,
Even birds, right? Anything.
even
Yeah,
birds. Yeah, even
plants
birds.
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely plants.
yeah, yeah,
Leave things as they are. Observe, enjoy nature for what it is.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's what's nice about the characters, Vikram and Aditya. They have that. You see that appreciation. They appreciate the intrigue of it. The beauty of it. But they both realize that this isn't something a boundary that they can cross per se. Like you said,
yeah,
look at it from the jeep, but don't cross that boundary.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's
that's nice.
natural. They already know about this in the stories. They don't
Yeah,
cross the boundary line anywhere. And
yeah,
they know
yeah.
what they can do and what they shouldn't do.
Right.
But at the same time, they're there in the wilderness, you
Yeah.
know, and absorbing it for what it is. And the story is set out there. And in fact, in that particular book,
Yeah.
I really wanted to bring out the life of a tiger. And I
Right.
remember scratching my head when I went there and I spent time there and I came back. I said, how do the beauty of nature cannot be told through a human aspect.
Yeah.
It
Right.
finally struck me that after trying various things, that the only way to get this through was to write chapters of a good portion of the book through the eyes of a tiger.
Right.
You know,
Right.
from its birth, from to the
Right.
way its mother brings it up. You know, how they
Yeah.
learn hunting, Okay,
Yeah.
till they become kings of the forest.
Right.
I think that
I
was the
really like
best
that. I
way.
really like that in the story. The instant that uh, that the tiger realizes that now he's independent, so he's made his first
That's right.
kill, and
Correct. Yeah.
he's left his mother and sister, and that's it. He's
Yeah.
cut the cord per se.
And
So
that's
that
what
is a
tigers do. Once they grow
yeah,
up, they become independent, and they very fiercely protect their territories. And
right.
all this I learned. I was very lucky. I didn't know all of this. I mean, I read, I researched, and I got a lot of help. I must say, the wildlife community of India has been so helpful to me, so
Yeah,
helpful to me. And I have
yeah,
been lucky to have great friends out there,
yeah,
and they give me great inputs, and that's how I write
yeah.
my books.
Well, there are so few people writing for this age group about about Indian wildlife, right? So I'm sure they would be very happy to have more
They are.
people do
There
this
is no
kind
doubt
of
about
work.
it. Yeah,
So yeah.
with
So
them. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about your storytelling that we haven't really covered much about. Is why did you choose, let's say, first the kind of most of them are adventure slash mystery kinds of stories. Why did you choose that particular genre first?
Oh,
Um,
because
yeah.
I just love adventure. In the sense, as a kid, the kind of books I read. Uh, in our time, there was this writer, Alistair MacLean, and there was this
Right.
Desmond Bagley. Then there were westerns. There were Tarzan books. I just loved adventure stories. I would read them over and over and over again. I myself liked would I loved traveling to these places and having an adventure on my own. So in the sense that
Right.
it was always going to be that, because I mean I'm true to what I love in books, and that is
Yeah.
adventure and stories where
Yeah.
you've got to keep clicking the page because you just can't help it. The stories hook
Right.
you, and you have to be part of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's this doesn't come naturally, by the way. You have to work hard at it. I mean, I said yes, I want to become a writer, but I had no clue whether I could actually come up with a story.
Yeah.
And it was hard work creating these stories, and even today, it's very hard work. But
Yeah.
that's the most important crux of the book, right?
Right. And I wonder if you can comment about how you link your the story and the adventure along with, your intent to bring out the importance of
Wildlife.
wildlife and conservation. Yeah.
So, it's the selection of these books, the areas where these stories are written. I would always go to a place where there is the kind of wildlife I'd love to bring out.
Yeah.
B, and then as I said, I always instantly connect with the wild. There's in all these areas, whether it's the oceans, whether it's the mountains, whether it's the forests, whether it's the deserts, there will be somebody studying wildlife there. And I track them down. I go and meet them. I spend time with them, and so
Right.
that's where I get the material from. And and then of course it's the whole story is woven in such a way that wildlife and nature are in you know very much part of the story. So
Right.
if you notice, most of the characters are wildlife officers. Okay,
Right.
I would have a wildlife officer in the story. I would have somebody like a wildlife researcher. So that always helps to bring the focus on wildlife.
Right.
And at the
Right.
same time, you have to build the story in, and that requires a lot of thinking. And when I go to a place, I don't have a story in mind. I go with a completely blank slate,
Right.
and I create. And after observing things, spending time there, I create this platform from which to launch the story, and that's how it begins.
But it's also the case that you've woven a lot of sort of information into the stories. This is what we talked about yesterday, without actually, like you said, making it into a lecture. So I learned something about tigers reading this particular story that I didn't know about before, but I learned it without realizing that I had learned it. So maybe you can say a little bit about that
It's
style of
important, isn't it?
writing.
It's so important. If you gave a kid, if you told them that, okay, tigers live in forests, this is their prey, okay, this is what they do, the kid wouldn't read it, right?
Yeah.
So if I try putting it like that, and unfortunately, a lot of story writers do that, and then their books aren't read. The important thing is to weave it so deeply into the story that is indistinguishable from the adventure.
Right.
You just want to keep going, you want to keep this, and the kid has no clue
Yeah.
And when he's finished the book, he's actually got a lot of information, he has a lot of knowledge about that particular creature, or about wildlife,
Right.
or or
Right.
about a coral reef or something like that. So it
Right.
is very important to embed it in such a way that, and in writing, and as I was explaining earlier, maybe it's for the audience, I can say there are two ways. There's a very famous way of, I think, 101 in writing is that between show and tell. All right. So telling is like you put a lecture, you just put it down out there, and you don't really. Showing is to bury the information in such a deep manner, in such a nice manner, that the reader has no idea, but still absorbs the information. It's a very important part of storytelling.
Right. Yeah, I think you've done that so well in your books. It's really nice to
Thank
see.
you. Thanks.
Yeah. So now that we've talked about Vikram and Aditya, maybe we can talk a little bit more about birds and the Feathertail series. So did they come up? Did the Feathertail series it came up a little bit later, right? After the
Much
Vikram
later,
and
much
Aditya.
later. In
Yeah.
fact, my introduction to Penguin publishing house, they
Yeah.
were the first ones to actually pick up the this particular series, because, you know, I'd always wanted these stories, because they're about birds,
Yeah.
that you have to have illustrations. You can't write about, say, a pelican or an egret or a hornbill and expect the child to imagine it completely. And
Yeah.
I had to have great illustrations, and they had to be color illustrations. Now you think about
Right.
it, when you write a book which is in 4 color throughout,
Yeah.
it becomes
Yeah.
an expensive thing. And
Right.
so most publishers were just not willing to put it across, because the cost angle
Right.
involved. And luckily for me, Penguin, was happy to
Nice.
go ahead with these,
So do you
and
have
that
a
gave me the opportunity. Yeah, yeah, go
did you have
ahead.
a particular illustrator you work with, or is it
So I
just
went through
varies?
several illustrators. At the start, I just couldn't get good illustrators. Then I had
Yeah.
some illustrators. Illustrators, like writers, have a lot of ego. And so
Sure. Yeah.
I went through a couple who said, no, it's got to be this way. And I said, look, there's a goal. And the goal is for kids to actually uh, understand about birds. So you can stylize, and stylizing is important for an illustrator. I understand it. But you've got to stylize within limits, that,
Right.
uh, the actual beauty of the bird is captured in reality,
Yeah.
or as close to reality as possible.
Right.
And most illustrators want to bring their stamp in and change it, and which I don't blame. I mean, that's their,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I went through
But you
several.
wanted to stay true to your purpose, which is that
I
a
had to. I had
child
to.
should be able to appreciate
That's
a
correct.
particular species of bird or whatever that they can
Exactly.
actually
So
immediately make the connect. Yeah.
so it'll be more realistic than stylized, and that's how it
Right.
was. And so,
Yeah. That is right.
and luckily, I eventually found the right. There was a young lady who did it with me, and then she migrated to Australia, and so then I found another young man who is so
Okay.
good,
Okay.
and me,
That's
and so we
that's
work very well as a team. In
that's
fact,
wonderful.
earlier I had to explain, okay, I want this image, this image, this image. Now with this current young man I work with, he just chooses the images, and I don't. I
Okay.
leave it
Great.
entirely in his hands, and he does the entire book, which
So since
is,
they're so nicely illustrated, maybe we could show a few of the illustrations to our audience members.
yes.
Um, yeah, and then you could maybe walk us through them and tell us a little bit
Okay,
more about
yes.
some of
So,
these.
so this is one of the most beautiful birds in India. I mean, imagine a name like paradise. So the
Yeah,
paradise flycatcher. It
right.
fascinates me, and I had to bring this out to kids. I had to write a story on this, and yeah, so that was what really
Can
inspired
you
this.
tell us a little bit more about the paradise flycatcher, in case there are
So
kids watching?
uh, it's it's uh, it's a bird found in India, and it locally migrates, and they they're they're flycatchers in the sense they eat insects, and you're very lucky. In fact, if you get a performance when it's chasing insects, and you're right there, to have this bird with this huge tail going up and down and around and giving you quite a performance. Uh, they truly are very
It's
beautiful
like a
birds.
gymnast with a ribbon, something like this. Yeah.
And when kids see this kind of a bird, these are perfect examples of when you see so much beauty in a bird, it kind of really connects. And therefore, I choose these iconic kind of birds. And this is
Right.
definitely one of the more iconic birds of India. and I had to set a story around this. And
Nice.
the illustrator is Krishna Bala Shenoy. He's brilliant. This is his work, and I really have to thank him for the work he's done in my last two books. They've been
Lovely.
fantastic. Yeah.
So just go to the
So
next one.
yeah. So yeah. So this is part of his work. I don't know. I guess there aren't too many. If there are any bird watchers, then you might be able to identify this bird. It's a stork. It's called an open-billed stork, and it's an image from the book. And I must say, he's done a great job of it. And see, when kids see images like this, the connection happens.
Right.
It's realistic.
You can immediately
Yeah.
connect it if you were to see it in
Correct,
real life. You
correct.
didn't want to sort of cartoonize it too much.
No, I
So-
didn't want to do that. And any of these birds, they're called open-billed storks simply because if you look at the beak, it doesn't
Right.
close properly. There's always a gap.
Right.
Okay, that's why it's called an open-billed stork. Yeah.
Nice.
So next.
Just one more.
Okay, this is a scene in which it's a. I won't explain
So
the
this
scene.
this
but
has more of a story actually to it, right?
Yeah,
This
there's a
illustration.
story to it. But you can see the crane out there. There's a couple of Saurus cranes. There's a hornbill sitting on the tree. Okay, there are pelicans in the right-hand corner. There's a dove in
Yes.
the left-hand corner. It's part of a sequence within the story. The lapwings. But you can again see they're very realistic, done in a way so that the kids, hey, I want to know more about that bird. Hopefully, I mean that's really
Right.
the idea.
Right. Right.
So
It looks like a community actually.
it is
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. 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 Very nice. So just go to the next one.
Okay, so this is what we call, in the story, there's a bird called Chorus. There's a story called Golden Eagle, and there's a bird called Chorus, who's a character in the story, and he's got this most incredible voice. And when he sings, all the other birds drop what they're doing and they just want to listen to him. That's part of the story. In real life, he's what we call a Malabar whistling thrush. And they have this haunting song, which comes out generally in the monsoons. And I love to trek in our Sayadris during the monsoons. And I keep hearing his beautiful song, which goes on and on and on and on. And so I characterized him as a bird who's got this incredible voice, so lovely
Right.
that even all the other birds love it, and they drop everything.
Right.
And so he
Right.
plays a big role in the stories.
That's nice to see that you've really I don't know
A
what the
similar
word is,
kind of
but
character, yeah.
yeah, you've capitalized on their inherent characteristics to add to the story.
True.
This is the Malabar thrush. Okay.
And here's the pelican, and along with that is this bird, which kids are pretty intrigued by. That it's a pigeon and it's green. Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
most people say, heck, pigeons are gray. But there
Yeah.
are several different varieties of pigeon, and this is the yellow-footed green pigeon. And
It's a yellow-footed green pigeon.
and it's actually a state bird of Maharashtra. And so he's one of the characters. So I try and bring out these birds, characters which are different birds. I don't want to have crows and pigeons and sparrows.
Yeah.
You bring out,
Naturally.
and these exotics and iconic birds, like pelicans, and you try and bring out these birds as characters.
And you try, of course, always to be as accurate as possible in terms of their habitat and what they eat and what they hunt for and so on.
Yeah, and what they eat is there. Habitat, sometimes they do come into areas which they don't go to. I mean, that's part of the storytelling.
Right,
But yes, I do try to treat them as what they are, and where they live and what they eat is correct. And if they don't, and if they're taken to an area, I give a reason why.
Right.
Okay.
But which is part of the story. It's not that they would
Yeah.
naturally find themselves.
They
in some-
wouldn't. You wouldn't find a
Right.
golden eagle in the southern parts of India. It just doesn't
Right.
come there. But then I give us the reason why it is there.
Right.
So
Nice.
yeah, these are just images of the story. And
So
then,
the reason I picked this illustration to show actually because this is one of the samples that you sent us. This is one of the ones that had some aspect of humans in it, though there is no human in it in the illustration, right? That there is some link.
No, the humans are very much part of my stories.
Yeah, no, I
There's
mean
no
in
way-
this illustration, though you can't
There is,
see a
yeah,
human,
there is-
you know the presence. Yeah.
The presence of humans is there without humans being there. That's absolutely
Right.
true.
Yeah.
They've been flying the whole day, and they'd come to spend the night inside this little gaushala, and it's morning, and they're flying away. They're flying out of it now. Okay, so but yeah,
After a
this is where
day's
they spent
rest.
the night. Yeah, they spent the
Okay.
night.
I like how you said that. It makes it seem like, it makes the characters come alive. They're resting and everything. So,
Yeah. Yep.
okay. This
So
illustration again tells a nice, already looks like a story when it's on its own.
yeah, so the story actually is about caged birds. I think one of the worst inventions humans have ever made is a cage. And you can see that cage out there hanging from that house, inside which is a peregrine falcon. I mean, you know, God gave birds wings, and wings, they can fly anywhere in the world. And it's the most terrible thing for a bird which can actually go anywhere in the world to be, you know,
Yeah,
caged inside. And so inside is this peregrine falcon, and it sings a song as part of the story, which is a song which all cage birds sing, and it's a very sad song, and it keeps repeating it over and over and again. And these birds and squirrel, who are characters in the story, they feel very bad for this bird, and they
right,
understand how terrible it's feeling. They want to rescue it, but it's a peregrine falcon inside, and falcons kill squirrels and birds like this, and they have them for
right,
breakfast. So they don't know what to do, and they kind of, that's part of the story. But the story is actually about don't cage birds. That's the
right.
worst thing you could ever do. I mean, that's and
So even though the birds and the squirrels are prey for the falcon, they're
and
very
they're so
empathetic.
scared about it, and
Yeah.
they're scared. They still are wondering, should we, shouldn't we, and
And can you tell us about the rest of the birds in this is a bulbul? Did I say this right?
yeah,
Like
that
what
is
is
a
it?
red-cheeked bulbul sitting next to
Yes.
the squirrel.
Okay, I've
Okay.
identified one. Yeah.
And the squirrel is a white-headed squirrel, which is very rare. They don't have white heads. I won't go into it, but that's part of the story. It's one of the main characters, in the sense that
Uh-huh.
this particular squirrel has been brought up by that bulbul.
I
When it
see.
was very young, his parents died, and because of its white head, the other squirrels refused to look after it, and
Right.
eventually it was going to die. And this bird brought it up, and so it became the only squirrel in the whole world who actually can speak the bird language, who's both a
I see.
squirrel and a bird. And
Right.
the other bird which is on the branch, is a magpie robin. So there's a magpie robin, you have a red-cheeked bulbul, and you have a peregrine
And the
falcon, which is you
white-headed.
can't really make out inside the
Yeah.
cage.
Nice.
So
Yeah, but the illustration by itself really tells the story. That's really nice.
it does, with the
Yeah,
bats
it's
out
very
there,
nice.
with the moon. It's a nice one, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's really nice. Good. And this is just, I wanted to, of course, include some pictures of the Vikram-Aditya series, coming back to it. So
Yeah.
this is the one on the left is the Ranthambore story that we've talked about already. And do you want to say something about the snow leopard story?
Well, the snow leopard has been an animal that has fascinated me since I was a kid. I actually picked up a book when I went to Everest. Base Camp. You need books to read because when you trek half the day, the remaining half you got nothing to do.
Yeah,
So we carried a lot of books, and this book is by Peter Matheson. It's a very well-known book. It's called The Snow Leopard. And in that, he tells about this animal which so little is known about, and how an expedition went into Nepal, into the home of the snow leopard, planted itself in the home of the snow leopard. 30 people for 3 months searching to study the snow leopard. You got to find it, right?
yeah,
And for 3 months, they searched and searched, and they never found it. Though evidence of its presence, in terms of paw prints, in terms of scat, in terms of where it used to rub itself against boulders and its hair would collect, it was all there. But
yeah.
they never saw the animal. It's called The Grey Ghost of the Himalaya, and it just fascinated me. And
So
I
it's
had
so
to,
elusive,
yeah.
right?
And so through my wildlife contacts, I got to know a gentleman by the name of Dr. Raghu Chundawat, who's an expert on snow leopards. And he used to conduct a trek into the mountains for people who are not wildlife researchers, but for people who are interested in wildlife. And I told him I would write a book on snow leopard. He said, "Come, join me." And so I went out for a few weeks with him, and the result is the story of the snow leopard,
Wow,
which is actually the grey ghost of the Himalayas. A really wonderful
right.
animal, and
Yeah.
that's how the story came
And so
about.
you actually did get to see some snow leopards.
Yeah, I did,
Yeah.
and it's an incredibly beautiful animal, and the story is about not just about the snow leopard. The story is about Ladakh, the upper reaches of the Himalayas, the
Mm-hmm.
beauty you find out there. And there's a lot about Tibetan Buddhism. There's a lot of things which are brought into the story.
Right. So you
So
really sort of cover the whole landscape.
I try and cover the cultural aspect of it, the landscape part of it,
Right.
the wildlife part of it, the joy of trekking, the adventure. That's the kind of things I try and bring out for the story.
Wonderful. And the
And
last
Lakshadweep
line.
I've spoken about. And
Oops.
yeah,
I'm sorry. I think I closed it by accident. Yeah, Lakshadweep you've spoken about.
yeah, I've spoken about. It's, we're very lucky to have these. Uh, Basically, there are uh, 1,000 islands in
Mm-hmm.
the Arabian Sea, starting from somewhere around where Cochin is, going
Mm-hmm.
all the way south to the equator. The upper
Right.
27 belong to us, the
Mm-hmm.
Lakshadweep Islands. The
Mm-hmm.
remaining 1,000 odd are the Maldives. All
Mm-hmm.
right. People go to the Maldives, little realizing that our Lakshadweep Islands there is no difference
Right.
in the undersea life, in the reefs, in the
Yeah.
lagoons. They're all coral atolls. And I told you
Incredible.
because I went there on the windsurfing expedition. I spent time out there, fell
Yeah.
in love with the place, and that was my first book actually.
Wonderful. Um, so I wonder if you have any kind of if you want to share what your plans are for the future in terms of what you want to write next or what's coming. Because I've seen from your website that there are many of your readers who are very constantly excited to see what's happening next because you, of course, you write these adventure novels, and I'm sure people want to know what's
Yep.
coming next. Yeah.
So there is one of the bird books is going to come up next. It's called the Sarus cranes. I mean, it's about Sarus cranes. Uh, there are about 15 species of cranes found in the world, and about 5 come to India. Sarus is actually permanently resident in India.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about the ostrich as the world's tallest bird, it cannot fly. It's the world's tallest
Mm-hmm.
bird, but it can't fly. The
Yeah.
world's tallest bird that can fly is an Indian bird, the Sarus crane.
I see.
Anyways, the story is about them, and that's a feather tales story, which at the moment I'm still plotting out, and
Okay. And that's
and
also
then
by Penguin.
that's got now all my books are being done through. That's
Okay.
the Puffin series. It's meant for younger kids. The Penguins,
Right.
a younger series is called the Puffin books,
Okay.
and
And
there'll be a
what's in store
Penguin
for
book
Vikram and
from
Aditya?
Vikram-Aditya. It's on the story on dolphins. I'm very, very keen to write a story on the oceans and the coastline. And there's a dolphin story which is in my head. I've done a little bit of research. I've been hanging around the beaches of Maharashtra,
Yeah.
moving around with people who are studying dolphins.
I see.
And but there's a lot more research to be done. I have to spend time
Yeah.
in villages. And this is going to be a very different Vikram-Aditya book in the sense that Vikram and Aditya are grown up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, They've finished college and they're working, and Vikram is
Nice.
teaching young kids, underprivileged kids, which is something which I would love to do. So I've given him the role. And it's not about Vikram and Aditya per se. The story is more about the children whom he is teaching, you know,
Right. So this
and
is the
they're,
kind of next step in the evolution of this series. It
in a
sounds
sense,
like. Yeah.
yes, in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
And, as I'm getting older, it's difficult to go and hang around in these places where I used to like cheerfully head off into Ladakh, 20,000 feet, trekking around in ice and snow and camping out. Uh, it's not that simple anymore.
But you've painted a pretty incredible picture of what the life of a writer can be. I'm sure the young audience members who are listening maybe would not have expected that, you always think of a writer as being somebody who's sitting at their desk and writing, and that's not at all the picture that you've painted with your work. So
Well,
that's really
to be
nice to see.
honest, it's 2 months doing the research. It's 10 months hard work by yourself, sitting in a corner, trying to come
And
up with
right,
something, which kids will
right,
read and adults will
right,
read. But
right.
yes, there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of fun in the
Yeah,
research part,
yeah, yeah. And that
And
probably sustains you through the hard work too.
and
Right,
the
that
hard
fun.
work is hard work till you get the story. But once you get a
Mm.
story, it just flows and it becomes
Mm-hmm.
great fun, and you just want to keep moving, moving, moving.
Right, right.
It's that initial bit which can last, that writer's block business which everybody's heard about. It
Yeah,
can strike. It can strike
Right.
pretty badly, and that really depresses you. But once you get a story and you know it's and you feel it's good, you have to feel that it's good, otherwise it's not worth
Right.
the effort.
Right.
But
Right.
then the excitement builds, and you wanted to get it out, and you want to do nothing else but write.
Right.
So, so that's
Very
basically the
nice.
process in a sense. You know?
Nice. Any last thoughts you wanted to share with the audience members, the readers, or the parents of the readers?
Well, to the parents of the readers, please get them to read. You know, kids, there's such a wonderful world of books, which today is just gathering dust. You know, it's
Right.
kids have got so many distractions. I mean, when we were kids, we had nothing. We had comics and books, and it ended there. There was no TV. There was nothing. Today, they've got laptops. They've got Game Boys. You
Right.
have all kinds of stuff. The internet, virtual reality, whatever you want. And so the book is kind of fallen away. And we need parents to understand that books, great stories just stimulate the mind. They take you to places that you've never visited. They, you know, good books also are the ultimate weapon against, when they grow up, against xenophobia, against racial these things, against, all the wrong things in life. Books build morals. Books teach you so much. You know,
Yeah.
it's something which kids have to get back into.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it stimulates the mind also, because when you're watching TV, the images are just there for you. You're not using your head when you write. When you read a book, you can
Right.
there's something set in the Himalayas. You're conjuring the Himalayas. You're
Yeah.
conjuring the people, the landscape. You know,
Yeah. Reading books, I guess, also gives you a little bit of time to figure out for yourself what you like and what you don't like, because it's a kind of it's an experience or something that you do in solitude, right? You don't read with somebody else,
absolutely, you don't.
right?
You
So it
don't.
gives you time to reflect. Yeah. Yeah.
It does. That's a very nice way of putting it. Actually, yes, it does give
Yeah.
you a tremendous time with yourself, and which is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice. Yeah.
So
So I think the
yes.
audience, we have some audience questions as well. Um, we have Vijeta who's asking you, how much time does it take for you to write a novel, and how do you make a living out of writing such amazing books?
Well, two questions. Okay, the first part is the time is it's a considerable amount of time, and writing is a full-time job. Eh,
Yeah.
For me at least. I know a lot of people who work and then they actually wake up at 4 in the morning, which is a good time to start writing because there's no disturbance. And they work till 9 and then they go to work and they come back. But that's pretty exhausting and hard. When I'm writing a book, I just do it full time. And a Vikram-Aditya book, which requires a lot of research, a lot of traveling, and a lot of thinking and a lot of plotting. They're full-fledged novels. They take at least a year to write one book. Could be longer also. Some of them have taken even longer. How do you make a living
That's the
writing?
harder question, right? I
You
think this is a
don't.
question that many
Uh,
aspiring
uh,
writers would want to know,
so
and
let
their
me break the
parents.
yeah, let
Yeah.
me break the bad news. You don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at the numbers, you require to sell hundreds of thousands of books to make some kind of a living. And Indian writers, unfortunately, don't sell hundreds of thousands of books. We don't have an international audience. We just have a national audience. And within the national audience, an unfortunate part is that the particular age group or the set of kids we want to write for, the ones who read English books, you know, and who go to convent schools and who go to English schools, they have a little snobbish attitude in the sense they love international books, the Harry Potters, and there's an incredible array of books, and they are fantastic books, and they're really superb books. And they tend to read more of those books than ours. So it's very hard to get yourself, very few writers like Ruskin Bond has done well, but that was in the latter stage of his life. For his first 6 years, it was a big slog. Uh, then there has been Sudha Murthy, who's done well. Besides that,
Then
it's hard
how
to
about,
sell.
have you thought also about getting your books translated into more Indian languages? Is that
So,
a
I mean, if somebody wants to translate them, it's up to my Penguin, my publishers. They would make the call on that, because it's finally a commercial decision. So,
Right. Right.
it'll come out of that. So,
Yeah. So we have another question asking, saying that
res-
research is an important element, but the audience member wants to ask about the creative writing process. How do you make the stories? Where do they come from, I guess? And how do you deal with writer's block?
okay, one step at a time, but
Yeah.
creative writing and research. Yeah. So research, actually, for my kind of books, which are wildlife story books, you have to do the research. You can't just get away. And the research has to be first hand. You can't have it second hand, that you read somebody else's book which has researched that. You have to go there yourself and you have to research the story. And that research, what it does, because then you just do, when you're traveling. When I went to the Andaman Islands, I traveled to so many different places. I learned so much about the islands, and that research created a platform. This platform is
Right.
very important. And from this platform, I could actually visualize a story. I had all the ingredients that allowed me to do the creative thinking that would form the story. If I hadn't created that platform through my research, I could never have written these stories. I find research is a very important part of the story, and it actually, what it does, it's the platform. And on that platform, you start, through that, you create your ideas. And yes, this is the most important part of the story, the creative writing part of it. It is the most important part of it. Getting a
Right.
great story which kids will want to just keep flicking through the pages. And you have to spend a lot of time on that. And then, so you do that, you have to, as I said earlier, you have to come up with a story which you believe it really excites you. It has to excite you when you are a reader yourself.
So are there any particular things that you do to sort of help you come up with these stories? Is there like, it's a location, or you're going on walks, or you read other books that then inspire you, or is there
No,
something
no, no.
that
It's
yeah,
just that it's the research I've done, and that's
yeah.
what I use. It's nothing more than
Mm,
that. I
mm,
mean, yes, you get ideas which you store away when you read newspapers, when you read about general life,
yeah,
etc.
yeah,
You store
yeah.
them and say, "Yeah, I'll explore it one day," and you might explore it through one of your stories. But yes,
Right,
you keep
right.
bringing these things in. But at a particular location, a particular place, the research
Yeah.
does
But there's
provide
also
the
something
platform.
about human creativity that's kind of inexplicable, right? It just
Yeah, you
comes
never
at
know
a
where it
moment.
goes. You set off saying, "I
Yeah,
want to go from A to B to C to D,"
yeah.
and you land up somewhere completely different.
Right, right,
And
right.
that's just the way it is with the stories.
Yeah,
And writer's
yeah.
block is a horrible thing. And I get
How do you deal with
inflicted.
that?
I get inflicted with every story, and always when I'm starting. Because A, you just don't have the discipline to sit. When you start thinking, you think for a little bit of time, then you get up and you walk and you do something. And you
Right.
always find ways to distract yourself. But you have to keep at it.
Yeah.
And it is hard because it's not easy to come up with a story. And you always have this thing, oh, I'll push it away and I'll do something else. But you shouldn't do that.
It's a bit like studying for your math exam.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't want
It
to,
is.
but you
You don't
still.
want to do it, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, as a teacher, you would straight away put it that way. But
Yeah.
yeah, uh,
Yeah.
the thing is, you just sit with it, and then the magic happens. At a certain stage, the story starts flowing, and
Right.
then that writer's block just vanishes, and you want to spend all your time there. It's
Right.
just you got to
So
get
you
through
become
that,
you. It's
come to
kind
that
of a flow
magic
state.
place. Yeah,
Right.
that's
Right.
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 You come to that
Nice.
magic point, and then you're through. You know, that's how
Yeah.
it is.
So
Okay,
we
the
have
next
another.
question.
Yeah. Next
Yeah.
question is: Northeast India has a very rich biodiversity. Have you researched and
Yeah.
incorporated this region into your book? And I like this question very much. Is when can we see a rhino on the cover of a Vikram and Aditya novel? So
Okay,
there's
so
people waiting for you to.
I have always wanted to set a story in the Northeast. I
Yeah.
have been to Sikkim twice. I've trekked a lot in the Sikkim mountains. I have also been to Arunachal twice. I've been through the forests out there. I have been to Assam very often, but I didn't get a story. It's as simple as that. And there are many places I go to, and I don't set stories. Though the idea was to go there to find a story. You know, I just, I mean, I really love the Northeast. I love the people out there. I love the landscape. I love the
Yeah.
diversity. I love the wildlife. I love everything about the Northeast, and I dearly want to write a story there. And I've been there a few times. but I still don't. I haven't yet created that platform.
Hasn't come.
It hasn't
So
come.
you'll have to go back to Kaziranga National Park and spend some more time there.
Though
To
I know for a fact it won't be at Kaziranga National Park, but there'll be in
no,
areas. Yeah,
much more
because
remote.
yeah, I need to find more remote places.
Right.
And I have been there, and I know a lot of wildlife people studying wildlife out there, and I have
Yeah.
connected with them, but I haven't got a story.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting to know. So it's not that every place you go, you do some research and the story
No,
comes
no,
out.
it
It's
doesn't work. I've worked in the
yeah,
Mudumalai. I've gone there twice to write a
yeah,
story on elephants. I've been to
yeah,
Bandipur. I've been to a lot of forests in the south.
yeah.
I haven't got the story, so I never got excited with my story. I just dropped it. So that's the
So
way
I
it is.
like this next question very much, which is what adventure will Vikram and Aditya have next? And mentioned it already a little bit that you wanted to write
Yeah.
something when they're more grown up. And you wanted to write about the children that they're teaching. Um, but the question is, do you have a challenge in continuing with Vikram and Aditya? And is there, yeah, I think that's a very nice
Okay.
question. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, as we said, the next story is going to be on the coastline of Maharashtra. It's going to be about fisher folk. It's going to be about the oceans. It's going to be about dolphins. It's going to be about turtles. And yeah, I have the story in my head. I have to just go for further research down there, and the story will come about. But it's going to take a little more time because there are a lot of research still remaining. I still have this other book, and so yeah. But hopefully, there will be a story coming out soon. The question about a challenge, now that's a good guess. It's a correct guess in the sense that there is a challenge in creating these stories, in the sense that I am getting older, and it's not getting easier to go to these places and spending months in them, and
So is that the only challenge? But it's also, when you're have a series of this sort, right? You have these two characters that keep recurring. So there may be also a challenge in terms of the writing itself and how do you
no, no, no,
is
that's
there
not a
more room
problem.
to develop the character or not, or you don't feel like you're not there yet at least.
Yeah, I don't think there's. I mean, the kids might grow up, like as I said in this next story, so that
You're right.
is
So
not a
that's the way to
problem.
deal with it. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just that getting a great stories, researching them, getting the wildlife in, getting it in.
Right. Right.
You know, you do as you get older, so you might want to do other things also.
Right.
So those things do happen, and
Yeah.
the urge which I had as a youngster, that's just continuously write books.
Yeah.
That is not the same as it was before. You
Yeah.
know,
So what
so
other things do you want to do now?
travel, hang about,
Yeah.
spend time with my kids,
Yeah.
teaching. There are a lot of things you want to do in life.
Very nice.
So who knows? But yeah, because writing takes a heck of a lot of time, particularly the kind
Yeah.
of books which I write, which has a
Yeah.
lot of research, and so energy has to come, and your energy is as you get older, you do look at other outlets also. So,
Right. Right.
the challenge
Understandable.
is very much there.
Yeah. It sounds like you've been on a very exciting journey actually as a writer, and even the fact that you didn't initially start off or plan to be a writer, and that you sort of found this passion a bit later in life. I know yesterday when we spoke, you said, perhaps I wasted time, but to me it sounds like it made you really enjoy the process probably more than you would have if you had started off being a writer all along. It's possible.
Maybe you're
um,
right. Maybe you're
yeah,
right. I don't
yeah, yeah,
know.
yeah. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and introducing us to Vikram and Aditya a little bit more. And actually, already in the course of the last hour, I've learned a little bit more about birds and tigers, and I'm sure our audience members have as well. So maybe now I
Thank you,
can
Shravanti.
thank you so
Thanks,
much.
thanks
Yeah, thank
everybody
you
for
so much.
tuning in.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
to our audience members as well.